Our next speaker is Professor Dhanorkar. Suvrat, it's really great to have you here live from the US. For you, it is good morning. It's cool to have you here, and maybe a bit of a background. Why am I inviting another professor here? Well, I'm more focused in my research on supply chain finance, and when it comes to sustainability and supply chains, Suvrat is the person to go to. And so I'm very happy to have you here also later on for taking on the more sustainability and supply chains related questions. And now the stage is yours.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Bigimai and Francisca, and just for having me here. My name is Suvrat. I am a professor at the Pennsylvania State University in the United States. My background, my background is supply chain management and specifically environmental or ESG aspects of supply chain management. So I can claim myself to be, one of the nerds in the room, along with I think David and Bigimai. So I will give my perspective about what research says about sustainable supply chain management, and what I do or what I like to do essentially is. Rather than working on specific case studies, I'm more focused on looking at, let's say, hundreds or thousands of companies and then pull all of that data together and then try to understand what are the average behaviors. On average, how do companies respond to regulation? How do suppliers respond to buyer pressure? What kind of tactics or pressures work to make suppliers or industries more responsible and more getting them to disclose more information about their ESG practices? So, going back to the original question, which is, can suppliers be incentivized to be more sustainable? I think the answer is 100% yes. We know that from past 2 decades of research. So I think that's the short answer, but I think there are a lot of challenges which I'd like to, and as well as opportunities that I'd like to put forward. So going back about 30, 40 years, I just like to, as a benchmark, want to bring up this idea of the whole quality movement that happened in industry, right? Or, back 50 years, where you had all of these lean management and total quality management and all of the practices that were embedded into supply chains by a lot of large buyers and companies. And essentially, I think in some sense, this whole movement of ESG is kind of similar, although there is a big regulatory aspect and push as well. But the challenges back there to get your supplier to have higher standards of quality were kind of established or kind of by buyers pushed down their supply chains by having, let's say, supplier scorecards or financial incentives or financial supplier development programs, audits and inspections and other techniques. And I think a lot of those criteria and a lot of those approaches work today as well for getting suppliers to be more environmentally friendly or to have more stringent labor standards. Like I said, on top of that, if it's regulation plays a key role. So whenever there is regulation, obviously it's easier for buyers to get their suppliers to do a little bit more. So I think that's the idea. Now, one of the other challenges I'd like to bring up is, we know through research, I think one of the fundamental principles is what gets measured is something that you can improve, right? So if you can measure sustainability in reliable ways, then you can have suppliers do better in the medium term or long term. So there are challenges. There have been challenges that we have tried to overcome through having good criteria for establishing benchmarks for ESG performance. So measurement has been one aspect, and measuring supplier sustainability standards. The second, which I think is more challenging, and we haven't completely reached a point where we can say we are successful, is verifiability, right? So although you can measure performance, a lot of times verifying supplier sustainability standards is extremely hard. And now if you go back first, to second tier or third tier suppliers or fourth tier suppliers, it's extremely hard. Companies as big as Walmart or Intel, who have had lots of sustainability practices, still find it extremely hard to know what's going on in their third or fourth tier in the supply chains. So I think that's one of the challenges of verifiability. And one of the other challenges, especially in the environmental aspect, is how do you know what's right and wrong in terms of what firms are disclosing, right? There are all of these concepts about talking too much about your ESG performance or practices and then talking too little. So in research, what has been labeled, and it's more popularized now, is the concept of greenwashing, or whether suppliers or firms in general can greenwash their way out of expectations and basically create a facade where you just talk a lot about what's going on and do very little. On the other hand, a lot of big companies now have also adopted this approach of brownwashing, which is strategic silence. So given all of these media expectations, a lot of companies have figured out that it's actually more beneficial to maybe stay just a little bit under the radar. So, you keep doing your stuff, but then try to avoid the media while doing as much good as you can do. So going back to the original question, I think, can suppliers be incentivized to do more and be sustainable? Like I said, the answer to wrap up is 100% yes. What are the challenges? I think measurement, we have been able to improve on that a whole lot. Verifiability is something that needs to be improved even further, especially as you go down or upstream in the supply chains. And then finally, I think the question is, how do you create this institution, or leverage a variety of institutional pressures where you have buyers that are coercing suppliers or encouraging suppliers, and then you have regulation as well as peer pressure and competitor pressure acting in tandem. So you have not just suppliers, but whole industries moving forward in terms of their trajectory of improvement.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Surat, for your comprehensive answer.